Okay, welcome back, and let's continue on with our panel discussion. I'm so pleased to welcome really leading industry speakers from a variety of different viewpoints across the ecosystem here. What I'm going to ask is that each of our speakers introduce themselves and introduce their companies, and then we'll dive right into our conversation. So first, we're going to start with Andy Atwell, who's Executive Director of New Business Development for Global Innovation Incubation Team at Omron Healthcare. Hi, Andy.
Hi, good afternoon. Jennifer, thank you and Parks Associates for including us in today's discussion. I'm the Executive Director of New Business Development at Omron Healthcare. We are the #1 doctor and pharmacist recommended device for blood pressure measurement. And we have most recently entered the service world by bringing our VitalSight program, which is a hypertension management platform, to the market.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. We're very familiar with Omron and very happy for you to be joining our panel today. Next, we have Becky Fox. So Becky is the Chief Nursing Informatics Officer with Atrium Health, as well as the founder and Chief Strategy Officer for Vital Circle. Hi, Becky. Can you tell us a little bit about Atrium and about Vital Circle?
Sure. So one of my roles is as the Chief Nursing Informatics Officer for Atrium Health, which is a large integrated delivery network health system located in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. And then I'm sure, like many of you, when the pandemic began, there was many of us focusing on how we can make a difference. And so that created the foundation of Vital Circle. And it's a company that really tries to focus on prevention, privacy, and peace of mind by bringing data to folks and understanding how they can help prevent COVID-19.
Wonderful. Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about the Vital Circle application, here we go, on the slide here, and how it might be used?
Yeah, so Vital Circle is unique in that we bridge two different things. So first of all, we have a symptom tracking so that on a daily perspective, you can capture information of your exposures, any symptoms that you might be having. And then we couple that with technology in a wearable contact tracing device. So when you're wearing your contact tracing device, if you come within 6 feet of anyone else, it detects that connection and that contact, and then now you're armed with a lot of information. So what happens is businesses, schools, civic groups have used our technology to really make an impact. When they bring groups of people together, everyone does the daily symptom tracking and then also wears their contact tracing device, and that if anyone comes down with symptoms or if anyone has an exposure, you instantly have data and you can see where your risks are and can really focus and mitigate those in a lightning speed.
Yeah, that's interesting. We've heard about the use of apps, for contact tracing in the smartphone, and then it sounds like you're also incorporating a wearable piece. Can you tell us a little bit about how that's worn?
Well, one of the things that we learned in talking with many people around the United States and beyond is that there's a lot of skepticism of having somebody go into your personal device and using Bluetooth technology. And so what we found is, employers, schools, civics groups really need to protect entities and protect their employees, their participants, but we also understand we need to respect and protect their privacy. So again, back to that situation where employers come to work and they put on their contact tracing device, wear that while they're at work, but then when they leave, their privacy is protected. And then that way you know exactly what's going on when they're together or in a work environment. And again, at the moment that you know that you have a risk, you can instantly focus your team. So you might want to think of it like with different businesses, distribution centers, for example, or one great example where historically, if anyone comes down with symptoms of COVID, you might have to shut down an entire line. Now, when you have this contact tracing information, the moment that 1 or 2 employees come down with symptoms of COVID or have an exposure, you instantly can see all their points of connection and don't have to shut down your business, don't have to shut down your school, don't have to cancel your event. And our technology has been really successful in this. One of our first clients was the Republican National Convention, where we were able to help keep both the citizens that were participating in the convention, but also the citizens and community of Charlotte really safe, because you had all that instant data. So the moment they had any type of risk, they were able to intervene within minutes, and most importantly, continue on with their important work of having the convention.
Okay, thank you. I know I made you do a longer introduction, but I wanted to make sure we understood exactly what, that vital care solution, or vital circle solution is. So thank you so much for
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Next we have Anthony Call, who's the co-founder and COO of CloudDX. Anthony, welcome.
Thanks very much. Great to be here, and thanks to the Park Associates team and Jennifer for putting this on. This is terrific. CloudDX is a virtual health platform, and we do full suite of RPM products and software. We're a device manufacturer as well as software platform, so we make or curate the devices that go into our platform. Quality of data is very, very important to make diagnostic decisions against, so we can talk for hours about that. Our current use cases out there in the world, both in the United States, across the US, and in Canada, are COVID virtual outpatient programs. This concept of being able to free up space and decant COVID patients who are symptomatic and positive but stable into the back at home, and monitor those patients and look for exacerbations, bring them back into the care continuum if needed, but really reduce the burden on the system and improve their outcomes. We do a lot of post-surgical remote patient monitoring to reduce hospital readmission programs. Hopefully to be published in the next month or so is a 900 patient trial we just completed for post-surgical that has amazing results. And we also do traditional chronic disease RPM, so monitoring our most expensive rind of patients, CHF and COPD and that kind of stuff.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here as well. And next we have Dr. Raj Podwall, who's the CEO of MMHG.
Great. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm a professor of medicine at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Canada, and also CEO of Millimeters Mercury. We're focused on creating simple but elegant cloud-based software solutions for chronic disease management. A particular focus is high blood pressure. We also really focus on evidence-based practice because of our clinical and academic backgrounds. So creating efficient products that allow practitioners to really in a seamless and default way practice in an evidence-based manner. A major partner is A&D Medical, so creating software solutions that pair with their excellent connected devices.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here as well. And finally, we have Emmanuel Sambuis, who's the Senior Director for Consumer and Healthcare at Silicon Labs. Emmanuel, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you doing, Elizabeth?
Great, thanks. Tell us a little bit about Silicon Labs.
Exactly. Thank you for having me. So as you said, I am the marketing director with Silicon Labs with a specific focus on consumer and healthcare. Prior to this, I've been working in semiconductor for over 20 years with in a number of places. But with Silicon Labs, what we have is a specific focus on the IoT market. We actually generate hundreds of millions of dollars in this specific business. And what we have for time is specific competence around wireless connectivity products. Of course, as a semiconductor company, we are, I guess, one of the foundation blocks of all the other people here in the panel. We build the little things that people do not want to hear about, but that gives you the ability to build great products for our customers and the end users. We're, of course, a hardware company. As you know, semiconductor is basically a market of scale. So we ship hundreds of millions of products, and IC, hardware ICs. But one of the specific things as well about Silicon Labs is we have invested many of our resources and our OpEx into software. And when we talk about connectivity, and later we'll be talking about security, that's one of the things that we're pushing, and that very much right now, and that is a differentiated factor for us, specifically in digital health.
Well, yeah, it's interesting to have tracked the IoT space for a long time, which we do at Parks, beyond the healthcare ecosystem, and to see the applications of IoT now in health and from the home out to the facility, as we see a lot of the remote patient monitoring programs coming in from the facility into home. So interesting to have your perspective as well. Thanks for being here. Well, so I'd like to start off in going back to something I was talking about when I set up this session generally, which is really the role of devices in the virtual care connected health ecosystem generally. I think that the services, have come a long way this year. We saw dramatic uptake of telehealth consultations, but the devices and the data that's being captured aren't necessarily always there. So I'd love to just get your perspective on the role of devices in the connected health ecosystem today and the extent to which they're being used. And perhaps we can start off with Anthony here.
Yeah, so I think that you've hit the nail on the head. The role of the device is really the role of the data that you're trying to capture. If we sort of break it down into two value propositions for a clinician when it comes to a virtual visit and managing a patient virtually with data or without, it enriches a virtual visit. So if you're in a virtual visit with a patient, the importance of the data that you're driving from the SpO2 or the temperature or blood pressure or visual means of being able to look at wound care and things like that, it's just as important as it would be if you were in an in-person visit. So in that acute environment, it's very, very important and can add a lot of richness to the virtual visit. It can also stop you from having to bring that patient in and escalating that virtual visit to an in-person visit. And then on the chronic side, it really does establish a baseline and allows you to do trend analysis against vital sign metrics with devices in the home that you would not normally need to do. In fact, all of us, I think, who make these types of devices would agree that blood pressure specifically, to make diagnostic decisions against blood pressure is actually better to have a nice long tail of at-home quality blood pressure metrics as opposed to white coat syndrome induced in-clinic metrics. So the role of these devices is to provide outstanding, linear, trendable patient data to make diagnostic decisions on.
Yeah, absolutely. And same question to you, Andy. What are your thoughts about the ways in which devices are really being incorporated in connected healthcare today?
Sure, thank you. And Anthony couldn't have set it up better for me. As the manufacturer of a blood pressure monitor, that's what we are really focused on, is building a history of accurate data that's available to the clinician as well as the patient, so that they have something to talk about, they have a history to look at, have an understanding about their chronic disease. So at Omron, we particularly focus on hypertension, which is one of these diseases when not under management requires continual by the physician. And in the time of COVID, where they are discouraging individuals coming into the clinic for fear of exposure, but that doesn't, preclude the fact that these people still need regular care and monitoring for their hypertension. So using platforms to gather that information, the home really becomes an extension of the clinic. And having devices with clinical accuracy at home and being able to transport that data securely is very much a real possibility. And it's represented here by Omron and my other colleagues that are joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Beyond the remote patient monitoring use case, of one thing I think, Anthony, actually you just mentioned was the idea that even from the diagnostic perspective, right, if you're calling into a telehealth service, right, being able to see data coming out of devices is pretty compelling. That also presumes that the devices are already in the home as opposed to having been provisioned to the home. What's your perspective on how or if there's an opportunity to have more devices that are really penetrating into consumers' homes?
Well, for us, I think that we'll get to the point where your home will have a medical kiosk in it at some point in the future. That concept of the Star Trek tricorder vision, where if your daughter is complaining of an ear infection before school, you go to the tricorder and enact an immediate virtual visit. You've got, a TytoCare otoscope, you have temperature, you have You have diagnostic testing for saliva and all the rest. I mean, that will be the vision. I think that that's ultimately the place that we'll go to completely democratize medicine that way. I think that there's a role to play to B2C consumer devices now, and certainly in where we're seeing penetration in the market for companies like ours is in really expensive patients or chronic disease managed patients, where giving them a kit of gear makes a lot of economic sense, and that's the thin edge of this wedge that will move forward into a much more sort of consumer experience.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. So let's talk a little bit about how the connected devices and sensors you both mentioned, dramatically increase the depth or quality, perhaps, of the of the visit, and the physicians in particular ability to see what's going on. Also expands what you can use telehealth for, right? Or that expands what we can think of our use cases for connected health. Let's talk about a little bit more about the new use cases your organizations are serving, and where you see the most potential growth. So we go back to Becky here. The way that you're using technology for contact tracing is obviously comes directly out of the pandemic, and is something that really wasn't on anybody's radar a year ago. Yet here you are. So tell us a little bit more about how your technology is being used, and maybe are there other adjacencies? Are there ways in which you expect this kind of technology to expand from where you're at now?
Yeah, I think Anthony and Andy really helped frame that there is a shift, but the pandemic has changed many things, and it has also changed our perspectives of where health needs to occur. So we all know that many wanted us to get to a place where virtual care was just the norm. And I would say, if we went back in time 5 years ago, people would say it's going to take us a long time to get there. And now, of course, the mindset is, well, why haven't we been there already? So this whole concept of having technology on you or a part of your work or part of your experiences is going to continue to evolve. And so, what we're hearing and what we're seeing is people want to leverage technology so that you can empower folks to make decisions. So when you have a workforce that you need to keep safe, that you need to help, that impacts your business and your ability to serve your customers or consumers, then you have to use data whatever way you can, and yet at the same time still respect those privacies, still understand how you can ensure safety of everyone, and keep your businesses and keep your consumers moving in the right direction. And so I think the expectation and the culture of the world is going to expect these types of things to keep us safe. So when I go to an event, for example, if I'm going to go to a conference and now has 10,000 people, the reality is not everyone's going to have the vaccine. Not everyone's going to have herd immunity, but yet we still have to have our economies open. We still have to get together in conferences and large mass groups of people. So how do we do that in a safe way? And that is by bringing technology, combining sources of data, and then leveraging that to make a difference to everyone that's participating. So whether you're using technology in your home, whether you're using it in your business, your school, or your any activity that you're going to be doing, I think there's a huge shift in the culture that people are going to expect that you do that. They expect for you to keep them safe as a participant, and that's going to be the new norm going forward.
Yeah, I was going to actually, and you touched on it just at the end of your comments there, but ask, once there is a post-COVID, if that even exists, there is some talk, of course, that the virus itself will be around with us for a long time. Do you expect that it will essentially be an expectation, even after the direct immediacy of COVID-19 is gone, that my health as an employee or an attendee or a student or a staff member is still going to be this, this expectation that others are looking out for my health when I'm at their facility?
I do think that that's going to be the expectation, that we know that we don't think that this will be the last pandemic, that there's going to be several iterations. And so it's going to take us quite a number of years to really wrap our arms around this and make sure that as a society, whether it's in just the United States or beyond, are really safe. And the way to do that is by leveraging technology and putting it in the arms and of those that are keeping your businesses, your schools, and your entities open. So we've got to get there in protecting folks. And the way to do that is with contact tracing, capturing symptom information, and then, of course, leveraging other services that the panel's talking about, virtual care, et cetera, and really using our technology so that we can keep our economies open.
Can you tell us a little bit about, is there certain sectors that you're seeing the most demand in right now? So is it mostly events-based, or employers or universities, right? Is there a certain sector that's most demanding these types of solutions?
Yeah, we're really seeing it across all industries. So event space is probably the best one, that because people want to get together for a 3 or 4 day event. And so that makes the most sense, that you bring all these people together, you contact trace them so you know all of the interactions that occur. And then, of course, you can continue to monitor them even after the event to make sure no one develops symptoms in those 10 to 14 days after the event. And then, of course, communicate with everyone to make sure everyone knows if they've been exposed or had any risk. But we're also seeing a big uptick in schools, and because these are just natural places that people come together. And what I like to remind people of, I'm of a few decades old, and for these several decades I've been on the earth, it's those are my habits to get within 6 feet. So even though we can put up signs to remind people to wash your hands and be protective, the reality is that's not our nature, and that's not what we've been doing for our entire lives. And so there's just a reality that schools are going to still continue to struggle with exposures. And if you have exposures at schools, they take it home. We're still going to have exposures in businesses that will have to shut down, or we even see it in the healthcare sector in particular. And we know we have to have our healthcare folks available to take care of patients. So, when we talk to healthcare organizations, that's their big struggle. They could have a 36-bed unit and they have 50 or 75 different staff members, and or 1 or 2 of them come down with symptoms, they have to test the entire unit. And so it just makes a manpower, a financial challenge to do that, as opposed to having a dashboard that I can quickly look at. And at 6 o'clock in the morning before a shift starts, I instantly know where my risk is. I can isolate the people that I need to, and I can keep the unit functioning and lower my costs while at the same time mitigating those risks. And then what we're also hearing, whether it's in schools, healthcare, industry, what we're hearing is that both the employees then feel safer, because I know you're monitoring me only when I'm at work, but now I know that you're keeping me safe. You know what's going on with all of us and how we're interacting. And so the instant that you have information, we're able to really jump on that and make a difference. And so what we're hearing is that the teammates actually value that. And then, of course, what it allows you to do is communicate to the world that these are the efforts that you're doing. So from a business's market perspective, that helps them with ensuring to the public that they're providing and really taking all steps that they can to make sure that everyone's safe.
Yeah, really interesting. Next question, Raj, can you talk to any new use cases that you're seeing for your technology and your solutions kind of rising out of this past year and kind of going forward, where the opportunity is in the connected health space?
Yeah, thanks. I think when you take a step back and look at care provision in the clinic, it's a paradigm that's quite well worked out. So you can basically plug and play what you want to do in a clinic environment, because that's something that's been around for decades. I think that a lot of practitioners like myself were blindsided kind of with what happened with COVID, and I agree with my panelists. It's a great development that virtual care has been accelerated, but the virtual care visits are a little bit rudimentary in the sense that, you have a video or a phone linkage, but you don't really often get all the data, and it's very patient dependent in terms of how the quality of the data that you're getting. So we're really focused on best clinical practice, and what we try to do is enable providers to measure and monitor the chronic diseases in an efficient way, but also something that is underpinned by the decades of research that have occurred in the past. And if we take hypertension as an example, I totally agree with Andy. It's one of the most important conditions out there. 100 million Americans are affected by it. I would push back a little bit on what Anthony said, in the sense that I don't think you want to trend it daily and look at it every day, because that's not really where the clinical evidence sits for hypertension. It's really getting a core set of values to estimate that person's actual blood pressure. And that's usually across clinical guidelines in the world between 3 and 7 days. And then you make a diagnosis, and then you want to titrate therapy. But you don't really have to monitor in between that. You can do it a month or a month and a half later. And so these are things that providers are not really well focused on in the virtual care environment. They're very used to it in the clinic environment. And that's one of the things that we bring to the table, is to try to help providers align their virtual care in the best manner possible.
Yeah, thank you. I think we have a little audio feedback there. There we go. Yeah, Raj, it's really interesting because what you're also speaking to there, a lot of times we talk about in connected health, whether or not you need a device to be, a one-time use, an acute diagnostic type role versus an ongoing, all the time monitoring or daily monitoring. Well, there's some conditions and some use cases where it's a week or it's these specific days, and it really complicates the matter because you have so many different conditions, so many different device types, so many different vital signs that are going to be unique to that care condition, and really speaks to why everyone really is looking to the B2B side and provisioning and coming through care providers versus the direct-to-consumer play. I mean, there are certainly strengths and weaknesses to both, but I think what you're talking about really speaks to the need for providers and provider systems to be able to have a strong role in shaping the solution that's most appropriate.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add, when you look between hypertension and, say, post-acute care, the post-acute care environment is where you have the daily readings, whereas the hypertension environment is where you want to do it in a different way. And so these paradigms, these flow charts of how to care for each condition, they're in their infancy. People aren't used to doing it virtually, and that's what we need to develop.
Interesting. Well, let me turn to Emmanuel. So very interesting, again, perspective coming from the silicon side, coming from the IoT side, thinking about wireless infrastructure, which I know that you do, wireless standards. Can you talk about use cases from your perspective, maybe starting from the consumer side or starting in the home, and what you see as new, potential possibilities there?
Yes, absolutely. I can make a parallel with the home. Actually, I don't know how many products you have at home that are wireless connected, but you probably have more than what you think. Let me just give you some examples. You might have a voice assistant, that is Wi-Fi enabled. Your water and gas meters are very likely monitored continuously by the utility company delivering to you, and that's why you can connect to their website and see how good you are with your own consumption. Your garage door opener, probably another wireless system. Your thermostat might be now Wi-Fi enabled as well, so that you can actually change your thermostat while you're remote. Maybe you're on vacation and you want to come back and you want to put the heat up. So the reality is, inside of our home, it's actually pretty easy to find like half a dozen or even a dozen products that are already today wireless connected. There is one element of complexity in the home, is the variety of all these technologies that have basically to work together and coexist in the home environment. On the healthcare side, there is a clear winner. So that's the beauty of this. And I think it was Becky who said it before, it's Bluetooth. Bluetooth has been selected as kind of the best way to connect portable medical products for patient monitoring. There are multiple advantages to Bluetooth. First, it's ubiquity. It's been deployed into hundreds of millions of smartphones, heavily used on a daily basis, so it's a very robust technology. Second thing, it's low power. One of the things we haven't told yet is the majority of remote monitoring products are actually battery powered. And they might have different lifetimes, but it's very important to understand that as soon as you're dealing with the battery, you need to keep the power down. And the last piece is the security aspect and the privacy of the data. And of course, in healthcare, that's a very big thing. Well, Bluetooth initially was not designed to handle data privately, because if you remember the origin of Bluetooth, it was actually designed for earbuds and Bluetooth audio solutions. So data privacy was an afterthought, but it quickly came into Bluetooth. And since the Bluetooth version 4.2, which was deployed a few years ago, there is now a privacy feature deployed in Bluetooth. So if you want to make the parallel with the home, I would say I completely agree with the panel. We're going to see more and more digital connected products on the healthcare side, the same way we are seeing it on the home side, with the difference that the technology of use is very low. I'm not saying we won't find other corner cases, but for the majority of specifically patient monitoring in products, Bluetooth is going to be the clear winner. The big advantage of Bluetooth is it connects to your phone, and which you can use as a gateway to basically transmit the data to a remote location. So if you want to connect to your doctor or your hospital, the Bluetooth can give you the in-home connectivity solution, and then the phone is going to give you the mean or the media to basically convey this information to your doctor, who could be sitting miles away. And that's the beauty of Bluetooth. So I think if you in terms of use cases, one big thing that is common, that is a very strong care about in medical and healthcare, is the data privacy and the security of the data communication.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a follow-up question for you, but first I want to bring our audience's attention to the polling tab. So we do have a poll question in here. If you haven't had a chance to visit that yet, I'm just going to give you an extra minute to get your answers. And we have a question to the audience, which is which connected health use cases will see the greatest growth in 2021? The options being disease or illness monitoring for travel, employment, and schooling. Telehealth diagnostic support, whether that be acute or urgent care type needs, ongoing chronic care management, post-discharge monitoring, independent living or aging in place applications, as well as fitness and wellness. But let me come back to you, Emmanuel, while people are getting their responses in here. So one thing that folks who may not be in the tech side very much, but maybe are on the healthcare side, hear probably a lot about 5G and advances in cellular technologies. And one of the application areas on the health side that people are talking about on the cellular side is that there's an advantage of, for folks who don't have a smartphone, let's say, or might have trouble with pairing. If you have a cellular-based health device, it's essentially plug and play. It has its own connectivity, right? It could be provisioned from a provider, or through a management provider of some sort, and then it kind of just works. But there are obvious, probably cost advantages to Bluetooth. So can you talk a little bit about, for folks who maybe don't live and breathe the technology side of this, what they might be hearing about 5G and versus the types of approaches that you're taking from the Silicon Lab side?
So absolutely. So you made a very good comparison between 5G or cellular, and Bluetooth. And basically what we tend to say is Bluetooth is a short range type of communication and cellular is a long range type of communication. And both can actually coexist, and they do coexist in your phone. So your phone has got both on board and they work very nicely together and you can use both. I don't want to go too deep into the details, but there are obvious pros and cons for either solutions. You mentioned the one for cellular where you basically avoid the need for having a gateway product in the middle. So you don't need to communicate to your phone and relay this information to something, at a distance. The one technical penalty that you're going to have with cellular is the power consumption. Mm-hmm. It might be a concern or it might not be a concern. Let me just take two examples. If you're using a pulse oximeter, for instance, and you are able to change the battery on your own, great. You might accept to basically change the battery more frequently than you would do it with the Bluetooth solution. Now, some other products, and here specifically talk about chronic disease, one of the big transitions that has happened in the past year, and is still happening as we speak, is in the diabetes side with the move from blood glucose monitoring to continuous glucose monitoring. Because one of the big benefits of remote patient monitoring is the ability to continuously monitor the data. There is a big shift happening right now in diabetes where people are adopting more and more continuous glucose monitoring. And these are basically a form factor. These products, you can't change the battery in those products. So depending on the product you use, you will actually see pros and cons for either technologies. We fundamentally believe that depending on the use case, people are going to adopt one or the other. If you want to track people, individuals, Bluetooth would be great. If you want to track your pet, I would recommend to use cellular, because you cannot guarantee that your pet is going to stay within the distance of the home where you can actually get Bluetooth to work. So depending on the use case, both things are going to coexist and work together. But the thing is, what I want to bring as a message is these technologies exist, are well proven, and can be used, in a large number of end products from a medical perspective and all other applications. So they're absolutely us to use them.
Interesting. So the results of our poll, there are 3 kind of lead use cases that folks have settled on. 26% said telehealth, we'll only let them choose one. So 26% said telehealth diagnostic support. Also 26% said ongoing chronic care management. 22% said disease and illness monitoring for travel, for school, for employers. Only 11% said independent living, aging in place, which is really interesting. There's been a lot of attention from our perspective at Parks on the senior community this year. They're particularly, of course, at risk for poor outcomes from COVID-19, and that social distancing has really exacerbated some of the social isolation that population's already kind of privy to, and put a particularly new burden on caregivers to care virtually, right, for an aging family member. So we've heard a lot of talk about aging in place and independent living this year, but most focus on telehealth diagnostic support, chronic care management, remote patient monitoring type use cases. So let's turn now to business models. So the technology for virtual care and connected health products, the technology layer has really been available, right, to use for a while, and its sustainable business models have proven a little bit more difficult. Given the shifts in some of the regulatory and reimbursement landscape, that we've seen this year, what does that mean for the business cases for connected health solutions? And perhaps we can go back to Raj here.
There's a couple comments I have to make there. The first would be, as a Canadian looking at the American system, so take this with that in mind. It does seem that the business case kind of revolves sometimes around generating the revenues rather than the clinical care component of it. And so I really do believe, sitting in Canada with more of a socialized system, there needs to be better focus on the patient and on enabling the care providers to do the best job that they can. I think that the costing structure for some of these codes is a little bit focused more on process and rather than care provision. And so that probably should change. And I think then the business models would make more sense. So for example, for us, we're mostly focused on right-siding that costing structure. And we look at and talk to a fair number of providers that tell us, the revenues don't flow down through them. And that seems a bit bizarre to us sitting here in Canada, because the frontline workers are the ones doing the work. And so, if the revenues aren't flowing down through to them, they're not really incented from a financial viewpoint. So I think that that's a big issue. And regulatory-wise, I will throw in one other thing. In the blood pressure space, there are a lot of devices out there, regulatory-wise, that are not actually accurate or have not been tested for accuracy. And so this is a big and underappreciated issue. And if we look, so it probably encompasses all the different devices used in connected health, but if we look at the blood pressure use case, for example, when you say FDA cleared, that just means you're on the market. It doesn't actually mean that you actually look to see if that device works in the intended population. And there's a big global push on this by a variety of academic institutions and partners. It's really our hope that awareness is raised so that when you're procuring a device for your solution for your clinic or your hospital, you really look at, okay, is this accurate? And there are registries that list accurate devices. Like, for example, in the US, the American Medical Association has done a lot of work on this, and it's called validatedbp.com. It doesn't list all the good devices, but it's a start. Otherwise, I would say you should always be going with upper arm devices for hypertension care, because that's what a century of research has focused on, and validated devices. And, when you look at reputable manufacturers like the Omrons and the A&Ds and the Welch Allens, those are the companies that spend a lot of time on accuracy. So this is a big regulatory issue that I don't think is widely appreciated.
Well, thanks for bringing that up. To be highlighted here today. When you're talking about two provider systems or folks who might be looking to add a solution or add a blood pressure cuff, to their portfolio, do you find that they are starting to ask for that, to look beyond just basic FDA approval, to a higher standard of certification or efficacy?
Yeah, I think awareness is at ground level on this issue, and that's why I wanted to raise it. So I just don't think a lot of people know about it. They assume that FDA clearance means accurate, and it doesn't. And so, I think we got a lot of work to do on this end.
Okay. Well, Anthony, let me come back to you on the reimbursement and regulatory side. Do you see how things have shifted this year? What new possibilities are out there? And actually, we do have a similar question from the audience asking for the panelists' confidence that we can get reimbursements for telehealth and remote monitoring to not conflict with delivery networks' financial model. So, can you talk a little bit about the reimbursement state today and how you see that?
Cloud DX operates in both Canada and the US, and in our US deployments, it started not just because of COVID. We've really seen both the managed care side and the CMS and private insurance side really invest in a code architecture and in a reimbursement architecture that's recognizing the value of remote patient care and the value of patient-generated data using devices in that stream. So we've seen that building over the last few years, and it really kind of was really sort of brought forward during COVID when a bunch of emergency codes were given out and parity was given out. And I think we're going to see some of those that are being effective. They're going to continue on into 2021 and beyond. I think that to some of what Raj was saying about the Canadian side, because we've got all sorts of business there as well. In Canada, when a province decides and elects that it's going to do this, they tend to do it on a larger scale, but they don't necessarily wrap primary care into it as well as they could. And there is a gap there in reimbursing doctors to coordinate that type of virtual care. That's improving, and we hope to see that continue to improve. But I mean, I think it's here to stay. I think the genie is out of the bottle. I think that the payers, whether those payers are private or public, are recognizing the value in remote care and virtual care and devices in the home and quality devices in the home. So I see that as being valuable. On the regulatory side, I mean, absolutely, accuracy is precision. We talk about, the table stakes of FDA and Health Canada clearance are just that. They're table stakes to get into the game, and then it becomes a real question about precision and accuracy. And so studies and clinical trials, I would disagree on the whole. It has to be brachial. I'm a big fan of the Series 8 wrist cuff that Omron has. I think it's a gold level in Canada and is on the validated BP cuff stuff. So I'll give a shout out to one of my friends there. I think that might be outdated. There's movement artifact you've got to take into effect, and we make a wristbound cuff and spend millions and millions of dollars doing so. But I think that regulatory environment, in every RFP we answer, that always comes up. Not just, of course, you've got to have an FDA cleared device, but what are the follow-on studies? What are the correlation studies have you done? What populations does it serve? And show us show us the efficacy of that product. So I think that's going to continue. I think we're fortunate living in North America that it's rare that we get products that are completely out of whack. We're generally lucky to have decent products in our clinics and our care facilities, so that part is good. But I'm optimistic that 2021 and beyond is going to be good on the reimbursement side and on the financial vehicle side that's driving this. Because at the end of the day, you've got to follow the money to a certain extent.
Right. Well, and I'd love to bring the same question to Andy and also give you a chance to talk about, accuracy and precision of measuring through your devices. But also on this reimbursement side, so we have seen some acceleration. If you think about the business models from a larger perspective, not only being B2B and reimbursable, but also the direct-to-consumer market, which of course Omron has some business there as well. Do you think that the acceleration on the medical side and the payers means that most of the attention and development will be going there? Is the direct-to-consumer play still attractive?
Great question. And Omron has been active in both the B2C and the B2B businesses for quite some time. I think they serve a number of different purposes. I think the B2C is very good in preventative care, so aware of what your numbers are. For a long time. Blood pressure, of course, is very important. But now that we are faced with challenges in hypertension, with over 117 million people in the United States with hypertension, and over 37 million that have uncontrolled hypertension, moving to a B2B model where it's sort of enterprise-grade management and direction for the patient is becoming increasingly more important. And as mentioned earlier, this has been compounded as well by COVID, sort of the new constraints we have for healthcare now. I'll want to reflect a little bit too about the shift in payment, which is interesting. I mean, there's a lot of great veterans on this call today, including Mark Francis, and Health Hero Networks was one of the very earliest intellectual property around remote patient monitoring. We got patents on using telephone lines to transfer information. And I would say the technology hasn't, unfortunately, been what's been holding it up. Health Alliance in 2006 when they were setting up Bluetooth, as Emmanuel stated, as the standard for connectivity for health data and how to move health data safely. A lot of these solutions have been available, but it took something like the pandemic to really drive the adoption of these and to change the workflow of the clinician. And so I think that's been critical. One thing to note, there's definitely a benefit to having reimbursement, but right now those are specific to people under Medicare and Medicaid coverage, and not necessarily offered or covered by private insurance or other insurance to all subscribers. So there's a lot of benefit that can still be brought in. Where in the past, as the solution provider, you had to prove the ROI, why someone would want to bring it in and pay for it, that you just place that amount of costs and other expenses in the care of that patient. When you get to the point where the federal government is willing to pay for it, I'm pretty sure it's bringing a benefit, because these guys are not too, loose with the coverage that they'll provide unless they see that there's an actual impact in outcomes and a reduction in costs. So I think we'll continue to see certainly greater awareness and upticks in the business that we have in selling our blood pressure monitors through retail pharmacy, because of the component of cardiovascular with COVID. People are going to want to be more aware of how their heart is doing, what their blood pressures look like. But certainly, additionally, in managing these chronic conditions outside of the clinic and keeping better tabs on it at home, but having that data shared with clinicians, the B2B side of the business is going to be increasingly important.
So thank you, Andy. Now, we had a little bit of trouble with your audio. I could hear you, though, so I'm going to kind of restate a little bit of some of the points that you were making, just to make sure that we're bringing those great insights forward, and hopefully I'm capturing them well. So you were mentioning that there was a lot of that really the technology has been in place. You talked about Mark Francis, and Bluetooth, and things are kind of settled on the technology side, ready to go, and it's the business model that has been holding things back. And now when you see government payers getting into the market and actually saying this is worthy of doing, that's a really clear signal that there's value here because they're not, spending their money on anything. And then finally, just the fact that there has been raised consumer awareness, right? Consumers are more aware coming through this year of what's possible with virtual care. And that really has been, and we've seen this in our data too. I mean, it's just this level of consumer education that didn't exist before that's kind of been forced on everybody. And I'll also mention provider education, that providers have been forced into virtual care that may have been resisting it in the past. So hopefully I kind of brought forward some of the insights that you shared, but we were just, having a little trouble with your audio there. Well, so let me turn to one other question, and then we have a couple other questions from the audience that I want to bring in as well. Actually, let me jump to one that I know we had a question on earlier. I'm not sure if I'm seeing it in this panel earlier, but across the board, there's this question of after COVID, right? What sustained demand do we see for these? We have to assume that the use of virtual care telehealth maybe won't be the same as what we saw at peak levels when people could not access care anyway. They could not see their doctor any other way. If you wanted to see your doctor, it had to be virtual. However, what's going to stick? What level of usage do we see? Where is demand going to be? Maybe we can go back to Anthony on that question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm biasly optimistic in this front because it's important to us, but I certainly think that as I mentioned, I think the genie's out of the bottle. I certainly don't want to go back to a world where virtual care isn't available when I go to visit my doctor. I had a medical consult last week with my doctor. I was able to show my vital sign metrics because, of course, I have some gear in the house, potentially a few pieces, and it was just such a better interaction. I showed up at the right time. They showed up at the right time. It was over in 11 minutes. There was no parking. There was no driving. I could get on with my day. So I think that that's there. I think that what else has been opened is we talk about it internally. We say, come for the COVID, stay for the RPM. It really has opened clinicians. It's changed the mindset of the value of virtual care as a tool in the toolbox for clinicians. And I think if we see adoption beyond 2021 and sustained adoption, it's really because that mindset was resistant to change before, because change in medicine is hard. And now that they've seen that change and clinicians have interacted with virtual care and they've taken care of, potentially they've deployed virtual care where maybe they wouldn't to take care of patients that were high risk they didn't want to bring into clinic, and now they're realizing this is a really efficient way to manage my hypertensives or my COPD patients or my CHF patients. This is efficient. They're getting better care. My satisfaction scores are higher. And these guys were right. This is a better way to care for patients. And we see that in our deployments. We see, 4 years ago, we see pilot deployments for 200 patients in a COPD clinic that were only supposed to be pilots, where at the end they said, this is, our ethics officers having problems with going back to the original standard of care. We're going to just continue to maintain this rollout. And we're seeing that in almost every, certainly COVID decanting or virtual outpatient program we're doing. That device kits and that connectivity is all going to be re-rolled into a chronic disease at the end of this program. I think we're on our way. I think that we really are going to see a sustained benefit from this reawakening or awakening of virtual care.
Well, we see that in our data as well. You mentioned about satisfaction rates, and most of the telehealth users overwhelmingly tell us that they had a positive experience. And surprisingly, older consumers are even more satisfied, I think, because their expectations were so low coming in, because they were the most resistant to it before this year. So people are having some pretty good experiences with it.
It's complete common misconception that old people don't like technology. They love technology. They just have no patience when it doesn't work. So as long as it works and as long as it's providing benefit, they love it. You need to, usually, if somebody has this wonderful world of virtualized care in their home, you have to use a crowbar to get it out of there. They love it. They think it's great. They have access to their data. They feel empowered. They know what to do when they have an exacerbation. They're ahead of their nurse when their nurse calls. It's just a better way to provide care.
Yeah, not to mention, we talked about social determinants of health, things like transportation and elderly, patients being able to get to the facility. There's a lot of things that we're not even thinking about that might be value adds. We unfortunately are at time though.